WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. These WikiLeaks, as confirmed just today by WikiLeaks.
It's been amazing what's coming out on WikiLeaks. They want to distract us from WikiLeaks.
The wonder of WikiLeaks. Boy, that WikiLeaks has done a job on her, hasn't it? We've learned so much from WikiLeaks. Oh, we love WikiLeaks. Boy, they have really WikiLeaks. I mean, this WikiLeaks is fascinating. The WikiLeaks revelations. This WikiLeaks is like a treasure trove. WikiLeaks, right? WikiLeaks. And you know, as I was getting off the plane, they were just announcing new WikiLeaks, and I wanted to stay there, but I didn't want to keep you waiting. I love reading this.
I think Assange has become a kind of nihilistic opportunist who does the bidding of a dictator. I mean, he's a tool of Russian intelligence, and if he's such a, martyr of free speech, why doesn't WikiLeaks ever publish anything coming out of Russia?
Well, it turns out Hillary Clinton is one of these people who wants to not only exalt whistleblowers, she doesn't want to help whistleblowers or give protection to whistleblowers. Hillary Clinton, it's been reported, she wants to not protect people like Julian Assange and people like Edward Snowden. She says she wants their prosecution. According to WikiLeaks, she's called for an assassination of Julian Assange. Here's according to WikiLeaks. It says they're talking about Julian Assange and the problem, and Clinton's State Department was getting pressure from President Obama and his White House inner circle, as well as heads of state internationally, to try and cut off Julian Assange's delivery of the cables. And if that effort failed, then to forge a strategy to minimize the administration's public embarrassment over the contents of the cables. Hence, Clinton's early morning November meeting of state top brass, who floated various proposals to stop, slow, or spin the WikiLeaks contamination. That is when a frustrated Hillary Clinton, sources said, at some point blurted out a controversial query. Quote, "Can we just drone this guy?" Clinton inquired, offering a simple remedy to silence Assange and smother WikiLeaks via a planned military drone strike. According to State Department sources, the statement drew laughter from the room, which quickly died off when the secretary kept talking in a terse manner. Clinton said Assange, after all, was a relatively soft target. Quote, walking around freely and thumbing his nose without any fear of reprisals from the United States. So here her campaign manager, Robbie Mook, goes on, and here's what so they asked her, did she really say this? Here's what Robbie Mook had to say when they asked him about this.
Has tweeted out that Hillary Clinton has suggested a drone attack against his life. Can you respond to that? Do you think that was said in jest? Is it untrue? How are you taking that?
I'm reticent to comment on anything that the WikiLeaks people have said. They've made a lot of accusations in the past
that have been proven to be true. So then he goes on to spin it towards Donald Trump. He just goes on.
Donald Trump.
So he just goes on to spin it, and then he doesn't talk about it. So there we have it. So this is the kind of world we live in. Not only do we not protect truth tellers and whistleblowers, but we have people at the head of state, tippy top of government, trying to figure out ways to murder them.
Can you say to the American people unequivocally that you did not get this information about the DNC, John Podesta's emails? Can you tell the American people 1,000% you did not get it from Russia or anybody associated with Russia?
We can say, we have said repeatedly over the last 2 months that our source is not the Russian government and it is not a state party. and what is unconventional warfare? So unconventional warfare is warfare performed through the use of surrogate forces to overthrow a government. That's essentially infiltrate, train, and overthrow. That's what happened, for example, in Afghanistan. It's what happened in Nicaragua. Now that manual, which I mention in this book, it is active policy now in the United States. It's active military doctrine, and it describes that when the United States needs to do something, it pulls together the various arms of American power. Yes, those include the military arm, which we're very familiar with. They also include the intelligence arm, the financial arm, the commercial arm, and its informational power, and its diplomatic power. To bring all of these together in order to push on a country, in order to get it to do what the US government wants it to do, to work in tandem. And under financial power, yes, the IMF is explicitly listed. Under power connected to the State Department, USAID is explicitly listed. What I find very interesting about this convergence of different forms of American power together to achieve an end result is there's different theories of government, different theories of how the United States work. So one theory is you have various rivalrous agencies and rivalrous people within agencies and rivalrous corporations, and so it's actually very hard to get anything done. And there's no doubt there are cases where in the past where that has been true. It's hard to get this mass together. But the formal policy, and it comes together in practice, is actually to pull together all these different agencies, which might seem like they're working different beats, and push them together in sort of pincer formation on a country to achieve a result.
Individuals such as Julian Assange and Edward Snowden seek to use that information to make a name for themselves. As long as they make a splash, they care nothing about the lives they put at risk or the damage they cause to national security. WikiLeaks walks like a hostile intelligence service and talks like a hostile intelligence service. It has encouraged its followers to find jobs at the CIA in order to obtain intelligence. It's time to call out WikiLeaks for what it really is: a non-state hostile intelligence service, often abetted by state actors like Russia.
When I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
To convey to him that we're with him. We're not with him just for today. We're with him through this whole thing. through this whole experience.
But I always draw encouragement and courage from the fact that this person is willing to suffer for justice sake, and there aren't many of us around.
You know, hearing about Julian's internet getting cut off today, and the fact that his right to have visitors at the Ecuadorian embassy, that being taken away as well, we really feel that is a grave injustice.
He inspires hundreds of people to assist him. He inspires whistleblowers to trust him with information that is for the common good. He has spearheaded a movement for transparency.
It's really important that people stand up and defend him. He's been fighting for all of us. We should be fighting for him.
Julian is a man of principle like I've never ever seen anywhere.
You have so many supporters out there, man, and that have so much respect for you and keep fighting.
The millions and millions of people around the world who love Julian Assange, and I just hope that bolsters Julian, that he can feel in some way all the love and support that he has throughout the world.
This is Julian is, other than keep fighting, is that the ripples of what you have created and it will continue to create are immense.
Julian doesn't make any compromises when it comes to justice. Julian has time and time again put himself on the line for the cause of true justice.
You know, this guy has devoted his life to working out what's going on behind the curtain.
Sincerely, Julian Assange, thank you so much for all that you do. You have put yourself in harm's way, and that is an understatement.
Basically, we hate censorship. We hate people being told to shut the fuck up, and that's what happened to Julian.
Christine Assange has sent me the following message. She says that she thinks all of us have done such a fabulous job here today of advocating for Julian.
I'm upset that this has happened, but it's bringing us all together to support the truth and support the right of people everywhere, and to hopefully pay back Assange just a little bit for everything that he does.
People like Julian are so precious to us, and I just want to say, look, this is not a eulogy. He's going to be fine. He's going to kick some ass. They're going to do more than this. So I just want to say that I'm just waiting for the day for him to come home, pop some bottles, and live stream that shit.
Well, I know what's right. I got just one life. In a world that keeps on pushing me around, but I stand my ground. And I won't back down. Hey, baby, there ain't no easy way out. Hey, I will stand my ground, and I won't back down. No, I won't back down.
On July 21st, 2018, an alarm sounded among truth tellers and freedom lovers worldwide.
The situation, as I understand it, is exactly as the Intercept, World Socialist website, and Chris Hedges earlier this week reported it, which is to say that it looks very, very likely that the Ecuadorian government is going to hand over Julian Assange to the United Kingdom imminently, probably within the next few days, possibly.
Today, Glenn Greenwald from The Intercept was able to confirm with an anonymous source connected to the Ecuadorian Foreign Ministry that yes, Julian Assange is going to be handed over to the UK authorities in total violation of the Ecuadorian constitution, of Julian's asylum rights and his human rights.
Situation now, Glenn Greenwald wrote his story with the revelation that Ecuador is planning to hand over Julian Assange to the UK government.
An emergency live stream vigil was quickly organized, which included a diverse array of activists, former intelligence professionals, entrepreneurs, journalists, filmmakers, lawyers, artists, politicians, authors, philosophers, as well as whistleblowers, all got together in solidarity for Julian, all advocates of free speech. Speaking from 3 different continents in more than 4 hours, thousands watched as some of the sharpest minds discussed their concerns about the well-being of Julian Assange and how his demise is closely tied to the future of us all. But more than a meeting to state problems, this vigil was dedicated to finding solutions, a plan of action to take the internet by storm. With a close eye on the embassy, a united force was created on the internet, a force for freedom of speech, a force for human rights, a force for power to reckon with.
If Ecuador does this, and if the UK government takes custody of Julian Assange and arrests him and imprisons him, it is going to cause a global movement that we are going to start here today, where everyone can participate, where everyone is welcome to contribute in the fight to free Julian Assange and to make sure that institutions like WikiLeaks can continue to report the truth to us, the people.
But I like to invoke the Noah principle. Now, some of you know what that is. In essence, it's no more awards for predicting rain. Rewards only for building arcs. That's what we're about tonight. We're starting to build arcs.
And we have built a platform a public platform that all of you and everybody in the world can join and work on coordinating non-violent direct actions in support of Julian Assange.
Well, actually, just for supporting all the people like me who are dying to sign on to Discord at this very second, you were quite right. unityforj.com/Discord gets you signed in, and I'm there right now.
I'd see my son, and if I could just fly from this place, then I'd hold you in my love embrace. And if I could just speak to you now, I'd renew my vow.
United States says that they're defending democracy around the world, and they're not defending democracy at all. The United States is trying to silence people who are revealing what's happening, and Julian Assange is just the person who made it possible for those people to be heard. He's not a hacker, and he's not the source. He's the editor, and he's done a great service to humanity, and he needs to be protected by all of us.
I think that Julian Assange is one of the most important people of this century. He has, as a publisher, he has revealed all kinds of human rights violations, war crimes. This information needs to get out.
Our governments, the governments that represent us and are supposed to be our elected representatives, are war criminals. Julian has exposed this. Julian must be free. Bring Julian home to Australia.
I mean, Julian Assange is a whistleblower, but basically we've protected Australians overseas when they've gotten into trouble, when it's politically convenient and it doesn't piss off the US.
So put away your phones, stop scrolling, organise, take direct action, occupy, make a noise, be brave, defy the thought police. If Julian can stand up to them, so can you and so can all of us.
The claims that are made about Russiagate, Russian interference and so on are nonsense. WikiLeaks published information which had been leaked from within the Democratic Party. There is no evidence, apart from the assertions by American intelligence agencies, that it came from Russian sources. And frankly, it doesn't matter what the sources were because WikiLeaks doesn't know. It publishes anonymous sources. That's what it was established to do.
We're having this rally here at the United Kingdom Consulate in San Francisco to demand that they stop threatening to arrest him, that he should be freed, and also that the government officials in Britain and in the United States who are involved in war crimes need to be prosecuted, not Julian Assange. Hysteria against Russia, blaming Russia for the hacking and everything else is a subterfuge that basically they are covering up their own crimes in this hysteria against Russia. We don't defend Russia. However, the United States has a history of attacking Russia and blaming Russia.
So, Susie emailed this to me. It's the official statement from Christine Assange. And I quote, Julian once said that if there was unity in oppression, there must be absolute unity in the resistance to that oppression. The unity for J global citizens movement to resist the brutal political persecution of my son for his courageous, multi-award winning journalism absolutely embodies and champions this practical principle. Throughout history, citizens have put aside their other differences to unite against the abuses of power. I am in absolute awe of the integrity, truth, and courage emanating from the Unity for J movement. The diversity and quality of the speakers at the Marathon Monthly Unity for J online vigil is phenomenal and a journalistic feast in itself. Congratulations and gratitude to all the participants, organizers, interviewers, speakers, tech crew, artists, and live tweeters. Christine Assange.
despite Julian being a multi-award winning journalist, much loved and respected for courageously exposing serious, high-level crimes and corruption in the public interest. He is right now alone, sick, in pain, silenced in solitary confinement, cut off from all contact, and being tortured in the heart of London. The modern-day cage for political prisoners is no longer the Tower of London. It is the Ecuadorian embassy. Here are the facts. Julian has been detained nearly 8 years without charge. That's right, without charge. For the past 6 years, the UK government has refused his request for access to basic health needs, fresh air, exercise, sunshine for vitamin D, and access to proper medical and dental care. As a result, his health has seriously deteriorated, and his examining doctors warn these detention conditions are life-threatening. A slow and cruel assassination is taking place before our very eyes in the embassy in London. In 2016, after an in-depth investigation, the United Nations ruled that Julian's legal and human rights had been violated on multiple occasions, that he had been illegally detained since 2010, and they ordered his immediate release, safe passage and compensation. The UK government refused to abide by the UN decision. The US government has stated Julian's arrest as a priority. They want to get round the US journalist protections under their First Amendment by charging him with espionage. They will stop at nothing to do it. As a result of the US bearing down on Ecuador, his asylum is now under immediate threat. The US pressure on Ecuador's new president resulted in Julian being placed into strict and severe solitary confinement for the last 7 months, deprived of any contact with his family and friends. Only his lawyers could see him. 2 weeks ago, things became substantially worse. The former president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, who rightfully gave Julian political asylum from US threats against his life and liberty, publicly warned that when US Vice President Mike Pence recently visited Ecuador, a deal was done to hand Julian over to the US. He stated that because of the political cost of expelling Julian from their embassy was too high, the plan was to break him down mentally. A new, impossible, inhumane set of rules and protocols was implemented at the embassy to torture him to such a point that he will break and be forced to leave. They are setting my son up to give them an excuse to hand him over to the US, where he will face a show trial. Over the past 8 years, he has had no proper legal process. It has been unfair at every turn, with much perversion of justice. There is no reason to consider that this would change in the future. The US WikiLeaks grand jury producing the extradition warrant is held in secret, has 4 prosecutors but no defence and no judge. The UK-US extradition treaty allows for the UK to extradite Julian to the US without a prima facie case. Once in the US, the National Defence Authorisation Act allows for indefinite detention without trial. Julian could very well be held in Guantanamo Bay and tortured, sentenced to 45 years in a maximum security prison, or face the death penalty. My son is in critical danger because of a brutal political persecution by the bullies in power whose crimes and corruption he has courageously exposed when he was editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks. I call on all you politicians who say you entered Parliament to serve the people to stand up now. I call on all you activists who support human rights, refugees, the environment, and are against
war. To stand up now because WikiLeaks has served the causes that you fight for and Julian is now suffering for it alongside of you. A call on all citizens who value freedom, democracy and a fair legal process to put aside your political differences and unite and stand up now. Most of us don't have the courage of our whistleblowers or the journalists like Julian Assange who publish them so that we may be informed and warned about the abuses of power.
lugar de proteger a Julian Assange, se dedicaron en forma absolutamente ilegal, atentando contra el derecho a la privacidad, atentando contra los derechos humanos, a espiar a Julian Assange, cooptados por la.
The protection of legal privilege is an essential aspect of the right to a defence. The fact that we now know, as a result of criminal proceedings brought in Spain, that the company inside the Ecuadorian embassy was recording our private legal conversations with Julian Assange and handing them to the United States in the context of the United States seeking to prosecute and extradite him when we were preparing his case, raises serious concerns about the prospect that he could have a fair trial in the United States.
No worries. Thank you.
We're going to make a short statement here outside this courthouse, and later on we will try to be available to the press. Jennifer, we'll start here.
Since 2010, we've warned that Julian Assange would face prosecution and extradition to the United States for his publishing activities with WikiLeaks. Unfortunately today, we've been proven right. Mr. Assange was arrested this morning at about 10 o'clock at the Ecuadorian embassy after the ambassador formally notified him that his asylum would be revoked, and he was arrested by British police. We've today received a warrant and a provisional extradition request from the United States alleging that he has conspired with Chelsea Manning in relation to the materials that were published by WikiLeaks in 2010. This sets a dangerous precedent for all media organisations and journalists in Europe and elsewhere around the world. This precedent means that any journalist can be extradited for prosecution in the United States for having published truthful information about the United States. I've just been with Mr. Assange in the police cells. He wants to thank all of his supporters for their ongoing support, and he said, "I told you so."
Well, the only thing to add to this is the fact that this is a dark day for journalism. As Jennifer said, this sets a precedent. We don't want this to go forward. This has to be averted. The UK government needs to make a full assurance that a journalist will never be extradited to the United States for publishing activity. This pertains to publishing work 9 years ago, publishing of documents, of videos of killing of innocent civilians, exposure of war crimes. This is journalism. It's called conspiracy. It's conspiracy to commit journalism. So this has to end, and we urge everybody to support Julian Assange in fighting this extradition. Thank you.
What legal avenues are available to you to prevent his extradition? We will be contesting and fighting extradition. We've requested that he now gets medical treatment. He's been refused medical treatment for the past 7.5 years, 7 years since being inside the embassy. We will be fighting extradition, and he'll be brought before the court again within the next month. We're not going to be taking any more questions today. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, do you still love WikiLeaks?
I know nothing about WikiLeaks. It's not my thing. And I know there is something having to do with Julian Assange. I've been seeing what's happened with Assange, and that will be a determination, I would imagine, mostly by the Attorney General, who's doing an excellent job. So he'll be making a determination. I know nothing really about him. It's not my deal in life.
What would you like to see happen? What punishment?
I don't really have any opinion. I know the Attorney General will be involved in that, and he'll make a decision. Okay.
Some familiarity with the work of Mr. Assange.
I do.
Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, is my view, but.
Well, look, I think it is clear from the indictment that came out. It's not about punishing journalism. It's about assisting the hacking of the military computer to steal information from the United States government. And look, I'll wait and see what happens with the charges and how it proceeds. But you know, he skipped bail in the UK. You know, Sweden had those charges, which have been dropped in the last several years. But the bottom line is he has to answer for what he has done, at least as it's been charged. I do think it's a little ironic that he may be the only foreigner that this administration would welcome to the United States.
I am sure that the whole House will welcome the news this morning that the Metropolitan Police have arrested Julian Assange. Arrested for breach of bail after nearly 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy. He has also been arrested in relation to an extradition request from the United States authorities. This is now a legal matter before the courts. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will make a statement on this later. But I would like to thank the Metropolitan Police for carrying out their duties with great professionalism and to welcome the cooperation of the Ecuadorian government in bringing this matter to a resolution. Mr. Speaker, this goes to show that in the United Kingdom, no one is above the law.
Kristen was able to kind of globally put everything in perspective. This has been a long campaign. I was also, of course, in the court this morning for the initiation of this process, which will apparently culminate with a formal extradition trial February 25th or around there. This has been something that the United States has put in place, this long attempt to essentially seize and extradite and try Julian Assange ever since the publication of the Afghan and Iraqi war logs. There is all sorts of indications, even here in Britain, of a kind of railroading of Julian. I mean, for instance, when he was taken out of the embassy in April, he said he'd been in there for almost 7 years. 3 hours later, he's in a court being insulted by the judge, even though the only thing he said was not guilty as being a narcissist. No time to prepare, or I had 15 minutes to prepare. I mean, today, Julian, when he spoke, he was speaking by video link from a high security prison, Belmarsh prison. He disputed the charges made by the prosecutor that either he or WikiLeaks had done any hacking into U.S. government computers. And in fact, of course, even the U.S. admits that this was a conspiracy to hack, and it revolves around the effort by Chelsea Manning, then Bradley Manning, who was providing these documents to WikiLeaks to attempt to cover her tracks. And she reached out and appealed, apparently, to Julian. It's not clear who it was, but to help her. But there was no help. They were unable to help. So, but that's an important issue, as Julian correctly pointed out this morning, because it's not a crime, although it may soon be a crime. It's not a crime to publish classified information and documents. Indeed, I did it when I was at the New York Times, as did many other reporters. It is a crime to hack into government computers.
I think they're gonna run him into the ground, just like they tried to run Chelsea Manning into the ground. They have her back in prison now, you know, for the same reason. these people, it's like we have to have a whole system change in order for folks to feel comfortable speaking out about, U.S. war crimes. So we're just out here in solidarity trying to do just that. Make sure that the Pentagon knows we're not going to shut up just because they want to scare us by trying to, repress Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning.
The Ecuadorian government is now trying to divert attention from its breach of the law by engaging in a disinformation and slander campaign against Assange to poison public opinion on Mr. Assange. Our primary objective as members of the German Bundestag and the European Parliament is now to prevent the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States of America.
We observe with grave concern that the case of Mr. Assange, the US is extending its prosecution into the European territory and in Latin America. This extraterritorial prosecution is contrary to international law and must be condemned and rejected the European states. We call on the British government not to extradite Julian Assange to the United States of America. The European Union must take action to everything to protect a political persecuted publisher and journalists. We call on the governments of the Federal Republic of Germany, the government of Spain, to grant political asylum to Julian Assange and to work within the European Union and the European Council to grant protection and hinder the extradition.
As long as Julian Assange is in prison, as long as Chelsea Manning is in prison, and all the other courageous whistleblowers, journalists and publishers, east or west, all across the world, as long as they are in prison, our basic foundation of democracy is in prison as well, namely the freedom of speech and freedom of press.
With WikiLeaks, he was the first one to do that. It caused a paradigm shift, And this paradigm shift opened the doors for other whistleblowers, and you can see that even what happened to Chelsea Manning, it didn't hold back Edward Snowden to come forward, because as we see, even if millions of people are not courageous enough to do that, it only takes one out of millions to move things.
And it is a shame to see many of the world's media defaming him.
Free Assange! Free Assange! Free Assange! Liberté! 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 Liberté!
The fight is just begun. It will be a long one and a hard one, but we count on the general public to understand the importance of this case, and we will fight till victory.
There's only one decision.
On World Press Freedom Day, it's important that we consider the free speech ramifications of this case and what it means for journalists and media organisations everywhere.
Free Assange! Free speech! Free Assange! Free speech!
Very difficult to see Julian here, and to make our way through the prison to get to him was quite shocking and difficult. He does not deserve to be in a supermax prison. He has never committed a violent act. He's an innocent person. He hasn't access to a library, computer, any information. He's really cut off from everybody. He hasn't been able to speak to his children. And public support is very important. Fundraising is very important. He needs all the support he can get. Justice will depend on public support. And he's a good man. He's an incredible person. I love him. I can't imagine what he's been going through. And to see him was good to see him. It was great to see him, but this is just misrule of law in operation. It is absolute shock. He's sacrificed so much to bring the truth out, and we deserve the truth. And that's all I can say. I'm sorry, I'm just I feel sick. I feel nauseous. We need to save his life. That's how serious it is.
How's everybody doing? All right, cool. Good afternoon, everyone. So 2 months ago, the federal government issued me a subpoena as here at this to appear before this courthouse before the grand jury. As a general principle, I object to the whole institution of grand juries. Prosecutors run grand juries behind closed doors in secret. Based on my refusal to answer questions 2 months ago, in order to try to compel me to testify, they sent me into confinement. So I got released last week, and here I am today with the same subpoena, or a different subpoena with the same questions. Throughout this ordeal, I have had an enormous amount of support from some of the most closest people that I have, and also from like an enormous number of people online and through letters and through cards, and it's just been incredibly inspiring and really powerful for me. Jails and prisons exist as a dark institution, and despite that, it doesn't frighten me or disturb me. I mean, I've already been to jail, I've already been to prison, so attempting to coerce me with a grand jury subpoena is just not going to work. I will not cooperate with this or any other grand jury. So it doesn't matter what it is or what the case is, I'm just not going to comply or cooperate. Facing jail again, potentially today, doesn't change my stance. The prosecutors are deliberately placing me in an impossible position. Go to jail and face the prospect of being held in contempt again, or in the alternative, forgoing my principles, the strong positions that I have, that I hold dear. And the latter is a far worse prison or jail than the government could ever produce. So the truth is that no matter what happens today, whether I get into whether I get it, whether I'm placed in confinement or not, I'm not going to comply with this grand jury. Thank you. All right, questions. So the government has already stipulated that they're going to ask the same questions, and so we've both agreed to waive appearing before the grand jury and just go straight into we filed this a motion to quash the subpoena, which will be argued, and then we might go into the contempt hearing following that. There's a number of very recent filings that have impacted whether or not it's going to be made public or not. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes motions and back and forth right now. The judge is Trenga. As far as I'm aware, this is a different grand jury. I mean, well, it is a different grand jury. As far as I'm aware, it could be an extended period of time, but we don't know that for sure. Well, I think that this is ultimately, this is an attempt to place me back in confinement. I think that the questions are the same questions that I was asked before the court-martial in 7-8 years ago. Like, there's nothing new. They're not asking anything new. There's no new information that they're trying to get from me. In fact, the questions are very much the same things that I've gone over in that exhaustive, several hours long, and it's about this thick testimony. So I think that ultimately the goal here is to really, relitigate the court-martial from my perspective. They didn't like the outcome. I got out, so this is a way of, placing me back into confinement. Forever. Indefinitely. So this is a jail and not a prison. Jails have fewer resources available. So if I'm in there for an extended period of time, it's going to impact my health. They don't have the same resource. I had surgery recently, and I've had a few, thankfully not life-threatening complications, but I've had complications from the confinement that I just got out of. So they don't have the medical capacity to hold people in confinement for too long in a jail. So ultimately, if I'm in for years, that could really impact my health. So also the food in jails is 3 or 4 times worse. So the information that they want is they haven't identified a targeted individual. It's very broad and generic, and it's very much the same things that I was asked at my court-martial about what documents were leaked, when that happened. A lot of the same things. It's very sequential. It's not so much about how it was leaked. It was more about my intentions and when and the steps that I went through that process. So it's very, very much information that's already out there that they could just go to the court-martial testimony and see that it's right there. I think we have a very strong case. We have more evidence now. We have more information now about the grand jury subpoena. And this really is, even though it's a different subpoena, it is for the same questions. So this is based upon the information that we've learned from the previous process. We have a stronger case, I do believe. So I've actually reviewed the evidence in this case. Much of it is classified still, so I can't really talk about that. But what I can say is that and I've read the indictment, and I've read the affidavit that's attached to the indictment, and the case doesn't make sense. It seems kind of bananas in comparison to the evidence that we got out and the interviews that we've had. So it's just a very bananas case. It doesn't. I don't know what the government's doing with that. So I think what's more important here is the fact that there's already been an indictment. So if if there's already an indictment, then why are we going through the grand jury process? So, because the purpose of the grand jury is to obtain indictments. It's not to like review testimony or preview testimony. And that's one of the problems with that's one of the issues that we're raising, is that if this is for a case in which there's already an indictment, why is there a grand jury subpoena? We have raised electronic surveillance as a legal issue. I'm not terribly sure what I can disclose about that, but what I can say for certain is that we do believe that we have strong evidence that unlawful electronic surveillance has taken place. I think it's going to be very much a return to the conditions that I was in last week. All right. I think that's it. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Just a week after she was released, a federal judge has ordered Chelsea Manning back to jail for refusing to testify before a grand jury. Following a partially public hearing on Thursday, a U.S. District Judge found Manning in civil contempt after she once again refused to disclose more information about her interactions with WikiLeaks and its founder, Julian Assange. Manning served 2 months for refusing to testify on the same matter starting back in March. She was freed on May 9th after that grand jury term expired, but she was served with a new subpoena just before her release. If she still refuses to testify, the judge also imposed a fine of $500 a day that will kick in after 30 days and will increase to $1,000 a day after 60 days. Despite facing up to 18 months behind bars, Manning said, "The government cannot build a prison bad enough, cannot create a system worse than the idea that I would ever change my principles." She added that she'd rather starve to death than comply with the subpoena. Manning previously served 7 years of a 35-year sentence for leaking hundreds of thousands of classified government documents to WikiLeaks back in 2013. As for Assange, he's currently serving a 50-week prison sentence in the UK for violating bail conditions.
Come on, fire!
Hey, Roger.
Keep shoot.
Now, my role is that of a rapporteur. I have been mandated by the United Nations to report to all UN member states about their compliance with the prohibition of torture and ill treatment. So I examined this case and I reported my concerns to the involved governments, which is now primarily the UK government, but also the Ecuadorian, the United States, and the Swedish government, which have each contributed in my assessment to the medical effects that we have observed now. I would say he has been exposed to various forms and degrees of cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment that cumulatively have the effects of psychological torture. Now, he has been confined to a very controlled space in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years, with a very limited amount of factors that can impact his life. So this allows us also to assign the causality to these medical symptoms with a higher degree of certainty, because he has not been exposed to other influences for so long. In our view, the main factors that contributed to producing now this situation are the constant vilification and humiliation and unrestrained threats against him in the public space by the mainstream media, but also by current and former officials of these various governments up to state leadership, including even judicial magistrates involved in cases against Mr. Assange. Actual motives of these proceedings seem to be to get Julian Assange extradited to the United States, to make an example of him that would deter others from imitating WikiLeaks and Julian Assange in their activity. In these processes, in all of them, the standards of due process under international law have been seriously violated. It is my assessment that if he's extradited to the US, he has no chance to get a fair trial. When we look at the 17 charges that have been added recently, they all refer to activities that would normally be carried out by investigative journalists. So I do believe that media and mainstream media have all reasons to be concerned about this type of proceeding, and that it might set a precedent that would be extremely harmful for press freedom around the world. If a state wants to lift asylum, there is a procedure to do that, but it's a due process procedure that is properly announced, where you have arguments on both sides, you may have a legal representation, and then there will be a decision that can be appealed to a court. But a president just deciding one morning that today I will expel Julian Assange and take away his citizenship is certainly not even constitutional under Ecuadorian law. I believe it's very important to have this kind of comprehensive picture. The big elephant in the room in this affair is always the United States wanting to get their hands on Julian Assange. And I suspect, unfortunately, to conduct a show trial so everybody else will be deterred from doing the same things. In my assessment, there is no chance he would get a fair trial. Under the current charges, I don't believe that the death penalty would be possible, but there's nothing to prevent the United States from adding additional charges once he has been extradited, based on the same facts that they want his extradition for. And so I think there is, even without the death penalty, there is every reason to refuse that extradition, because there is, as I said, almost no chance that he will get a fair trial, and I believe that the sanctions that will be imposed on him will make sure that he will never set foot out of a prison again. I have worked in areas of war, armed conflict, other situations of violence and political persecution for 20 years. So I don't lightly come to the conclusions I have published today, but I have to say what I have never seen is several democratic states ganging up in order to persecute and isolate and single out a particular individual without granting him the protection that actually is accorded to him by the law.